Good evening, everyone. I'm Brian Trumbore with your nightly review for Wednesday, April 24. If you can identify who that group is, you win a big prize. That is the Circle of Red Rubber Ball fame, which was the #2 hit from 1966. But I just pulled this out. Haven't listened to it in a long time. They did the soundtrack for a X-rated movie, and that's what this is, called The Minx. And I had read an article on this a couple of years ago, picked up the soundtrack, and it's really great. From 1969. They say the movie, which I did not see, is better than I Am Curious Yellow. That ages me. Okay, the Dow Jones finished down 43 points to 14,676, about 0.3%. S&P 500 and NASDAQ were essentially unchanged. Gold closed at $14.29, up $21. Oil $91.50, up $2.35, and the 10-year Treasury once again 1.70%. It's Wednesday, bull bear day, investors' intelligence or lack thereof. Bulls 44.3, bears 19.6, and as always, that's a contrarian indicator. Durable goods orders, big ticket items, came out today for the month of March, down 5.7%. Not good, sports fans. That's the most in 7 months. Transportation down 1.4% versus down 1.7% in February. Lots of key earnings news. I apologize. Yes, they're still building the house. It could be going on for a long time. Of course, when it rains, I don't have to deal with it. Boeing came out with strong earnings, no special charges for the 787 in the first quarter. Its shares finished up about $2.75. Procter & Gamble guided lower, and its shares lost $4.80, got whacked. AT&T saw its revenues decline, and the share price fell $2. Ford Motor was basically unchanged. It beat on earnings. Overall net income was up 15% for Ford. Total revenue rose to $35.8 billion from $32.4 billion. But in Europe, Ford had pre-tax losses of $462 million. European sales were down 7% in the quarter, and Ford still expects to lose $2 billion in Europe over the course of the year. Speaking of Europe, London's FTSE index rose 0.4%. The IMF continues to pressure Treasury Secretary George Osborne to lighten up on the austerity. Paris rose 1.6%, Frankfurt 1.3%, so continuing a very strong two-day rally, even as the business confidence index in Germany dropped sharply for the month of April. But the two-day rally was based on the increasing belief that the European Central Bank will be forced to lower its benchmark interest rates, so poor fundamentals are good. Easy money. On the issue of the hack attack yesterday on the AP's Twitter feed that spoke of an attack on the White House which caused a flash crash in the stock market, the AP joins 60 Minutes and NPR Radio and some of the BBC channels and being targeted by an online militant group, at least we think it is these people, that go by the name of Syrian Electronic Army. They are, quote, proudly pro-Assad. Their mission statement on the website reads, "We are a group of enthusiastic Syrian youths who could not stay passive towards the massive distortion of facts about the recent uprising in Syria, and this distortion is carried out by many Facebook pages that deliberately work to spread hatred and sectarian intolerance between the peoples of Syria to fuel the uprising. The group professes to be involved in arming Syrian Arabs with science and knowledge against campaigns from the Arab and Western media." So the Syrian Electronic Army, I guess, is a group we need to be increasingly aware of. At least these security folks manning the battle stations at the likes of the AP. So after the market closed yesterday, we had Apple's earnings. The company announced it would return an additional up to $100 billion to shareholders by the end of 2015, increasing its quarterly dividend by 15% and boosting its share buyback program. Sales of the iPhone and iPad comfortably beat expectations. Revenue beat $43.6 billion, earnings of $10.09 also came in ahead of analyst expectations, though barely. So the stock on Tuesday closed at $406. The news came out at 4:30. The market liked it initially. The shares touched 430, and then fell back down so that by this morning, Wednesday, Apple stock was at $392, and it closed down a fraction at $405.60. Apple warned that revenues in its next quarter, this quarter, would come in below expectations at between $33.5 billion and $35.5 billion. Wall Street is looking for 38.9. Apple's cash is now up to $145 billion, though 2/3 of that is overseas. There have been concerns over the lack of new product launches. An analyst, Lauren Balter, said, "The market is tired of the same old thing at Apple. Investors are looking for innovation. The reality is that people are looking at other products now, and they are looking at other cool features from competitors." However, Apple's CEO, Tim Cook, tried to reassure investors and shareholders that the firm was continuing to take measures to ensure that it maintained its dominance in the market. Cook said the decline in Apple's stock price from $705 on September 21st over the last couple of quarters have been very frustrating for all of us, but we'll continue to do what we do best. The most important objective for Apple will always be creating innovative products. Our teams are hard at work on some amazing new hardware, software, and services, and we are very excited about the products in our pipeline. We believe so strongly that repurchasing our shares represents an attractive use of our capital that we have dedicated the vast majority of the increase in our capital return program to share repurchases. So Apple is boosting the program from $10 billion to $60 billion specifically. Cook, however, seems fed up with the increasingly unrealistic expectations for the company, as well as the growing view that its most innovative and high-growth days are behind it. But Cook hinted the company's next big product refresh would not come until the fall, and again, that's a problem short term. Meanwhile, the iPhone sales specifically came in at 37.4 million, which surpassed predictions of 35.4 million. 19.5 million iPads were sold, beating estimates of 18.3 million, but profit margin came down to 37.5% compared with the 38.5% predicted by analysts. Toyota said it sold 2.43 million vehicles during the first quarter, maintaining its number one position in the world ahead of GM and Volkswagen. But Toyota's first quarter sales declined 2.2%, while GM's rose 3.6% and Volkswagen's jumped 5.1%. Toyota has been hit by a resurgence of anti-Japanese sentiment in China. Toyota's sales in China were down 13% in the quarter. They were also down 15% in Japan because of the expiration of some subsidies for green vehicles there. Back to the corporate news in America. Yum Brands, the KFC parent, saw its shares rise sharply today, $4.50, and I don't totally understand why. Sales at its established restaurants in China fell 20%. That was pretty much as the company has been warning us during the first quarter. And Yum then warned that fears surrounding the bird flu outbreak were continuing to depress sales. Now, Yum gets half of its sales from China, over half. And most of the up to 5,500 restaurants in China are KFCs. CEO David Novak has said historically the sales impact of avian flu publicity has initially been dramatic at KFC, but relatively short-lived. Overall revenues for the first quarter fell 7.6%. So Yum has been dealing with two issues. The first came in December after the discovery of excessive levels of antibiotics in chicken from two of Yum's suppliers. So that promoted government food agencies to look into the supply chain, and the publicity was not good. And then this month we've had the emergence of this new bird flu, H7N9, and Yum admitted today that sales in April in China are down 30%. The reason the company's share price increased the way it did today was that investors are believing the company when it says it insists it will have positive growth by the fourth quarter in China. But with all due respect, that's totally dependent. You cannot possibly know if you're going to have positive growth in the fourth quarter. It's totally dependent on the bird flu virus being brought under control. And I'm not saying it's out of control. The World Health Organization says there is no evidence, this is from today, that it is spreading, no evidence that H7N9 is spreading in any sustained way between people in China. But I read a lot. I read a lot from China. And the populace is very, very worried. Witness Yum admitting that its sales are down 30%. They're eating at home a heck of a lot more, and they're staying away from chicken, even though cooked chicken should not be posing any dangers. But I would be concerned. Today, Taiwan reported its first case, so it jumped across the water. How did that happen? The case involves, this is from the South China Morning Post, for which I pay a hefty fee. The case involves a 53-year-old man who had been working in the eastern Chinese city of Suzhou. He showed flu symptoms 3 days after returning to Taiwan via Shanghai. The Centers for Disease Control said, adding that he had been hospitalized since April 16 and was in critical condition. The mortality rate so far is 20%. That's high. So that's why the people are going to be very, very worried. Finally, in Italy, Enrico Letta, a former deputy leader of the center-left Democratic Party, was surprisingly nominated today by President Giorgio Napolitano to be the next prime minister. Letta has to try to form a broad coalition now with the center-right, led by Silvio Berlusconi. Napolitano had been looking primarily at Giuliano Amato, a former socialist prime minister and veteran of the political scene. Letta is just 46. And he needs to form a cabinet immediately, and then he needs to receive a vote of confidence in Parliament that could come as early as this weekend, or certainly early next week. Berlusconi is definitely going to have a major influence in the new government. And Berlusconi has made clear that he wants the next government to fulfill his campaign pledge to abolish an unpopular housing tax imposed last year by Mario Monti's technocratic government, and to pay back Italians the tax they had already paid. Letta has stressed the need for immediate institutional reforms and measures to create jobs and lift Italy out of recession. Europe's policy of austerity is no longer sufficient, he said. Well, that's all for today. I'll be back with you tomorrow, Thursday. Take care.